Okay, thank you. I think we're now being broadcast live on YouTube. So good afternoon. My name is Unincorporated and I am the OPR designee to the Strategic Growth Council. In light of attendance and some technical challenges, the Strategic Growth Council will not be meeting today. We'll take some brief procedural actions and then adjourn. But after adjourning, the plan presentation and discussion of the UCLA Luskin Center Transformative Climate Communities Evaluation, which was item number 7 on the proposed agenda, and the Disadvantaged Unincorporated Communities Investment Framework, which was item number 8 on the agenda, will be instead presented in an informational webinar format with the opportunity for public and key partner feedback. So with that, I'm going to move to the item here, item 2, which is that without any objections, unless there are objections, we're going to pull items 3 and 5 and continue them to the August 26, 2021 meeting, which will begin at 1 p.m. So unless there are any objections, we will move to the next item here, which is with no other business to conduct, we are hereby adjourned.
Thank you, Nu and Tara. We will return at 1:07 in 2 minutes.
Great. Well, I want to welcome everybody back here. Thank you so much for joining us to the public information meeting portion of today's event. We are very excited to highlight the Transformative Climate Communities Program as part of the California Strategic Growth Council. My name is Jessie Buendia. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the Strategic Growth Council, and I'm here to serve as your MC for this very exciting panel that we have ahead of us. And so I'd like to introduce to the public our moderator and speaker, J.R. DeShazo, as well as Jason Cartman, director from the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. I'd also like to introduce Watts Jenny Scanlon, Chief Development Officer at Ucla. I'd like to introduce Transform Fresno, Dolores Barajas, Chief of Staff for Miguel Arias and Fresno City Council member. And I'd like to introduce Ontario Together, Yvette De Luca, President and Social Network Weaver, the Social Impact Artists. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Could we please share the screen and present the PowerPoints? Terrific.
So JR, really quickly, I'd love to go over the public comment portion before we jump in so that folks can submit their public comment cards while you all are presenting. Is that okay?
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today online or by phone through the Zoom webinar platform or by tuning in on YouTube where this meeting is live streaming. I am here to provide some information to help guide us all through the processes for this remote meeting, which we have designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. For those joining the webinar online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. In order to minimize the risk of background noise, you will not be able to unmute your phone yourself. For those joining online via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform doesn't enable video for attendees, so we will not be able to see you. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question about the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. If you are using the online Zoom webinar, the best way is by using the Q&A function, which several members on the SGC team are monitoring. And if you have joined by phone, you have access to email, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov, and you will see that email also on your screen if you are online. If you do not have access to email, you may text the number 916-634-3359, and that number is also available on the screen. If you plan to make public comment, you must be joining the meeting via Zoom, either through the webinar or by phone. Visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form linked there. You'll need to complete separate forms for each item on which you wish to speak. You may complete a form at any time during the meeting. And when we open the public comment period for your item, we will read the names of everyone who has submitted a form for that item. When you hear your name in that list, please raise your hand. To do this online in the Zoom webinar, click the raise hand function under the participants menu, and you can find that menu at the bottom of your screen. And to raise hand by phone, simply press *9. When it is your turn to speak, a member of our team will unmute your microphone. If you are online, you will see a window pop up alerting you that the host is unmuting you. You will need to click the option to approve the unmute. After that, you can begin your comment. If you are on the phone, you will hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted. Please begin your comment after you hear the recorded message. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks, and if you're online, you'll see a timer pop up on your screen. Please monitor that and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you are online or on the phone, staff will notify you when your time is up. After that, we will mute your microphone, and you don't need to take any additional action after that. If you are unable to complete the online form but would like to make a public comment, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. Thank you all so much for your participation, and JR, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. I'm assuming you're going to control the PowerPoint, is that correct?
Yes, you can just cue me by saying next slide.
Fantastic. So next slide. So I believe that you have already provided an introduction, but let me just say I'm J.R. DeShaza, Director of the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation, and you introduced our awardee panel already. We will hear from them in just a few moments. The goal today is for our broader team, including our community leaders, to share with you some of the preliminary findings from the Transformative Climate Communities Evaluation. Let me begin. Next slide. So I am going to give a brief overview of the Transformative Climate Communities program and our evaluation work. And then we will have a panel presentation, and then Jason Cartman, our project lead, will share some of the lessons that we've learned so far, and then we'll open it up to the public. Next slide. So established by AB 2722, the Transformative Climate Communities program invests in neighborhood scale projects that at once reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provide environmental health and economic benefits to residents in California's most disadvantaged communities. The TCC projects are developed and implemented through a community-driven process that requires local cross-sectoral partnerships. And each awardee implements the TCC investments with guidance and oversight from a collaborative stakeholder structure that includes residents and community partners. Next slide. So since 2018, TCC has awarded over $227 million in implementation grants to 8 communities, which you can see here on this slide. There are also 5 evaluators working on TCC, of which UCLA is one. We are working with 5 sites, 3 round 1 sites, Ontario, Fresno, and Watts, 1 round 2 site, Northeast San Fernando Valley, and 1 round 3 site, Stockton. It's worth noting that all 3 round 3 implementation grant awardees were former TCC planning awardees that are currently implementing their community's vision for climate resilience. And those are, the city of Stockton, the city of Oakland, and the city of Riverside. And so on the map, you can see the location of these communities. In the light blue, you can see the evaluators and the award amounts for round 1, round 2, and round 3. Next slide, please. So UCLA's approach to transformative climate community evaluation involves a focus on the purpose of evaluation, an identification of core evaluation tasks, and then we provide a range of technical assistance as well. And so I want to take a few moments and just review each of these capacities that we offer to our communities. So evaluation means a lot of different things to different people. So it can be helpful to review exactly what we're doing. And our purpose is to document progress, measure transformation, and identify challenges, lessons learned, and best practices for future climate action efforts at the community scale. And our core evaluation tasks are to collaborate with sites to develop an evaluation plan and conduct a process evaluation which documents how the implementation process has actually unfolded, and perform an outcome evaluation in which we assess how the TCC initiatives performed relative to their their intended goals, their objectives. And so our approach to the process and the outcome evaluation involves collecting both qualitative and quantitative data. And in support of the outcome evaluation, we compare changes in TCC sites, which might be called sort of the treatment sites, the groups receiving investments and this strategic support, with control sites. These are community areas that aren't receiving the benefits of these different programs and investments, to isolate the contribution of the TCC investments from outside factors and to describe really what their impacts have been. So lastly, we provide technical assistance through evaluation work, such as helping to estimate the co-benefits of the transformative climate community projects, to produce communications materials, which we'll show you some examples of in just a minute, that highlight the findings and the accomplishments of the projects. And we also support fulfilling reporting obligations by community leads and partners. Next slide. So in the spirit of the program, which centers communities, we'd like to begin by hearing from the 3 round 1 grantees about their own observations related to TCC. And specifically, we'd like to prompt them with a 2-part question to kick things off. First, what is your community's vision for transformation? And second, how is that vision being achieved in your community? Next slide. So I'd like to introduce again from Watts Rising, Jenny Scallon, the Chief Development Officer for the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles. Jenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Speaking on behalf of the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, as the initial applicant and administrator of our TCC grant, we're honored to be leading the effort on behalf of the community of Watts and to represent our collaborative partners in Watts Rising. Today, I wish our residents could be here because I think their words are probably reverberate much more than mine. So because they're not here, I want to start with a comment that was made, or an observation made by Cynthia Gonzalez, who is a lifetime resident of Watts and came with us when we attended our first SGC meeting when we received our award. And she made this comment to the board at that time. She said, being a statistic in Watts for over 50 years has meant being on the wrong side of the odds. The odds are you'll die 8 to 12 years earlier than most Californians. The odds are you'll have asthma, diabetes, or cardiovascular disease. And the odds are you're not going to graduate from high school. And the odds are that you have a greater chance of losing your child at birth. And the odds are that you'll be a single head of household on an income that's less than half the city's average. So why did we create Watts Rising? Watts Rising was formed by the community to change the narrative on Watts for good and put its residents on the right side of the odds. Catalytic change is happening, and Watts residents are ready to be the face of a healthy, vibrant community. This change was ignited and propelled by the Transformative Climate Communities Grant, and there's no doubt these funds have played an instrumental role in our fight to reshape the odds of Watts. TCC is providing a formulaic approach that's uniquely working, and what is most critical to its success is the grant's emphasis on partnership, bridging divides, and most importantly, community engagement. What we found is that investing in infrastructure is meaningless unless it's adopted, accepted, and used by the community. We can't plant trees if the community doesn't adopt them and they die. We can't grow fresh food in beautiful gardens if it isn't taken home, cooked, and eaten. Otherwise, it's useless. We can build bikeways and new sidewalks, but if the community is too concerned for their safety to walk or bike in their neighborhoods, what's the point? TCC understood this and made community engagement and adoption instead of construction of the project its North Star. And I think that has made all the difference for us. Next slide. The Watts community facilitated and participated in over 200 meetings, completed over 1,400 surveys, and reached over 5,000 individuals to develop the Watts Rising Plan. The community and partners chose projects that purposefully plug into a spectrum of strategies for meeting the collaborative's public health and economic goals. The 25 projects chosen, including the 18 funded directly by TCC, work seamlessly together to ensure the sum is greater than its parts. Our urban greening approach starts with an aggressive tree planting approach that will provide almost 50% increase to the tree canopy in Watts when we're done. We're making the greening of schools, rain gardens, and urban gardens into a teachable opportunity and opening residents and youth to green career paths. We're developing a greening program that takes place in people's backyards, not just in public spaces, ensuring a greater likelihood of impacting behavior changes at a household level and creating greater food security. Our active transportation approach was developed to not only address physical connectivity issues, but to also address behavior, safety, and perception issues. Watts Rising will bring up to 5 miles of new bike path to Watts. We're going to create miles of safer pedestrian environments. That includes an urban trail that is also an active art walk with changing exhibits, encouraging residents to continually explore their neighborhood while being physically and psychologically enriched. Our sustainable housing project brings over 200 units of new affordable housing to the area, along with 150 new solar roofs in our single family neighborhoods and energy efficient improvements to 300 homes to create improved energy resiliency, as well as helping our low-income households save money on their monthly bills. Lastly, our low carbon transportation projects are an opportunity to reduce car trips and local emissions through a thoughtful car share program and the creation of an all-electric local dash bus line that runs throughout Watts. Next slide. Watts Rising is focused on our future and meeting the ambitious outcomes described here. It's also our hope to create economic opportunity with the expectation that the effort, including its leverage projects, will create 180 construction jobs and approximately 300 permanent jobs. Training opportunities are being provided with accreditation in EV vehicle maintenance, solar installation, urban forestry, urban agriculture, composting, and culinary arts. This has been an incredible process so far. We're grateful to the Strategic Growth Council for recognizing the tremendous need of communities around California like Watts and designing a grant opportunity that recognizes the cost burden required to undo decades of neglect, disinvestment, and active contamination. TCC recognizes the strength of building community and fostering the tenacity of communities to dream and do better. And we are so grateful to be a part of this process and to have received a grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Next slide. I'd now like to introduce from Transform Fresno, Miguel Arias, the Fresno City Council member and Transform Fresno Outreach and Oversight Committee Chair. Miguel?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dolores Barajas. I'm Chief of Staff to Councilmember Arias. Sitting in for him, apologies, he was unable to join us today. But thank you for the opportunity to highlight the great work of Transform Fresno. Councilmember Arias represents downtown, West Fresno, Chinatown, and parts of Central Fresno. And as you mentioned, he sits on the Outreach and Oversight Committee as chair. I wanted to highlight just 2 of the projects that for today. Project 18, which is a college campus, Fresno City College, the West Fresno campus. It's with a park-like setting in large areas of urban greening, new bicycle and pedestrian paths of approximately a mile connect to the neighborhood's active transportation plan. The site will host over 450 trees to maximize shading around the buildings and pathways, landscaping with drought-resistant plants, outdoor sturdy spaces, and green infrastructure for stormwater retention and groundwater recharge. The new campus will provide residents with workforce training and educational pathways, and will offer technical certificates and degree programs leading to both traditional and green economy employment outcomes and increased community health benefits. Important to recognize is the City College was able to leverage $16.5 million of TCC funding with a $70 million school bond to create this campus. The construction for the campus began in October of 2020, and the site will be accepting students for the fall in 2022, which is exciting. The other project that I wanted to highlight is the Monarch at Chinatown. It is a four-story housing complex that will provide 56 single-family apartments adjacent to the planned high-speed rail station that will be built in 2025. A virtual groundbreaking was held in 2020 in September for this project. It will take approximately 18 months for construction and is expected to complete in March of 2022. The project is in partnership with the Fresno Housing Authority. And again, I think it's really important to highlight that this project is only 2 blocks away from the high-speed rail Fresno station. Next slide, please. Thank you. And just as I mentioned earlier, the importance of leveraging resources. We think it's important to highlight the leverage resources that ensure the TCC program supplemented and didn't supplant resources. So we exceeded our 50% match of $33 million, nearly quadrupled the local match to $122 million. And as mentioned earlier, the $70 million from the college campus and $27 million for the Chinatown housing project as well. And in terms of community engagement, I think as the council member sits on the Outreach and Oversight Committee, the role of the Outreach and Oversight Committee has been critical to ensure meaningful community engagement. The participants are deeply involved in the community. The members on the committee are deeply involved in the community. We have 16 members. We've held over 37 committee meetings. And in addition to those, 14 community meetings, well attended and able to answer and address community concerns and give project updates. So we have been part of those meetings and have been really impressed of the level of engagement of the Outreach and Oversight Committee membership and the public. And that concludes my slides.
Thank you so much, Dolores. And I apologize for not recognizing the councilman's absent earlier.
That's okay.
Next, I'd like to introduce Ontario Together, which will be represented by Yvette DeLuca, President of Network Weaver, the social and the Social Impact Artist.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Yvette DeLuca, and I'm the president of the Social Impact Artists. I've also been the community engagement lead and collective impact network weaver for Ontario since 2015. So today I would like to be in concurrent with our first presenter. I really wish that Rosario Santignon, who is a resident leader from Ontario and also a trustee of our TCC governance board, she should really be here today. I will do my best to represent both her and the resident leaders that we have in Ontario. So I'd like to focus today. We have a lot of projects similar to the projects that have been shared, and I'll touch upon those. But I'd really like to focus on our deep-rooted, transformative, resident-led community engagement. It's actually a project that's funded both by the $33.25 million investment through TCC, which we're deeply grateful for, and we fund the other half through leverage dollars. So since the conception of our transformation plan, we have focused on neighborhood level environmentally sustainable solutions to the deep-seated issues that we see in the city of Ontario. And there have been 12 resident leaders who have been critical in creating solutions, identifying the environmental issues, and working side by side with the city of Ontario, who is the backbone of not only the TCC project, but our Healthy Ontario initiative, and working with our community-based organizations and our systems, such as the school district that's involved. We're focusing on improving these environmental barriers to wellness, including air quality and greenhouse gas emissions. But overarchingly, we're focusing on the well-being and resiliency of Ontario families. Rosario Santignon, Maria Alonso, and 12 resident leaders in particular have worked with us for almost 10 years, identifying the deep community needs. Ontario has, in our Ontario Montclair School District, almost a 97% rate of children and families who live at or below the poverty level. There is immense housing insecurity, just as we see across the state of California. It's very, very much the reality in Ontario. High rates of asthma and a 67% obesity overweight status in the TCC project area, as last analyzed by the Department of Public Health. So this very much needed investment has catalyzed community and partner-led solutions. I think what's most innovative is our community leadership model. And while I really want to talk about the projects, and I will on the next slide, including the Vista Verde Affordable Housing Project, that are active transportation and low carbon transportation projects, I want to take a moment now to focus on our community engagement project. We have 12 Latinos who are respected neighborhood leaders who, like I mentioned, identified existing environmental issues, but most importantly, have really implemented our programs and solutions in partnership with the city and our organizations. And they're Latinas because the majority of people who live in our project area, most are monolingual Spanish speakers, and the majority are immigrants. So this dedicated community engagement model has been critical to weaving strategies and supporting alignment. These ladies are out in the community every day. They're knocking on doors. During the pandemic, they were texting, they were making phone calls. We were having monthly Zoom meetings, Facebook Live meetings. And not only were they sharing the resources that our Ontario Together TCC investment and projects are bringing to the community, but they were touchstones, just making sure that these residents were okay during such a challenging time. They lead outreach. We call them our street teams. 6 of our community engagement promotoras are paid through TCC funds, and the other 6 are leveraged. And it was critical during our pandemic. These leaders not only connected residents who have been deeply, deeply disenfranchised over many decades here in our region. They not only connected with them through technology, phone calls, texts, going to their door, with PPE, of course, but they taught them how to use the technology that's critical to not only survivorship in the quarantine and this pandemic, but accessing resources through the TCC projects. To date, in 2021, they have conducted outreach to 4,640 residents in the TCC project area, and it just has been phenomenal. Please advance the slide, and I will share Mayra Zaragoza's story. Thank you. So I've shared some pictures to really highlight how the TCC investment elevates the health, well-being, sufficiency, and today I'll add resiliency of Ontario residents. Just starting from my left to the right on the top row, we had the groundbreaking of the Vista Verde housing project in June. And it was phenomenal. This is a net zero, affordable, beautiful 101 unit housing in the TCC project area. It's adjacent to a low carbon transportation. All of the residents get free bus passes. They get have solar panels so that they're not paying energy bills each month. And I've highlighted in the middle two mothers here, both Mayra, who I mentioned, and Brittany. A good amount of the residents living here are single mothers. They were living in overcrowded housing stock. Brittany was living in a bachelor apartment for 7 years with her children. And Mayra did not have secure housing, nor did she have secure employment. So their stressors have been relieved, and they are so excited to thrive in this community. I'll wrap up by also continuing to move to my right and talk about the Ontario Shines project. Through this project, we have provided free solar panels to low-income, often disenfranchised property owners, either through homeowners who are homeowners or mobile homeowners with free solar panels. And we're on target to complete our goal of providing 100 homes or mobile homes, families who live in the project area with these free solar panels. I will conclude by pointing out in the very bottom row, you see in blue 9 of our beautiful Ontario resident leaders. They are the heart, they are the engine of everything that we do. And like our first presenter mentioned, nothing is sustainable without authentic resident leaders. And it was really important to me that you see the faces, and you probably see the hearts too, right? Of our street teams who are going out and making sure that residents who are almost often left out of traditional power structures, traditional conversations, traditional resource allotment, this team makes sure that those families are able to be beneficiaries of this project, but also lead this project. Lastly, we have Arthur Levine, who was the former leader of our carbon farm, led by Maria Alonso and Huerta del Valle. It's an amazing example of how a community can dream, create a vision, and lead projects that create well-being, resiliency, and sustainable access to healthy food. The last two pictures, Rosario Santignon, who is a resident in Ontario and also a board trustee for our TCC governance board, is conducting outreach. The very last photo in the corner is what outreach looked like prior to the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders for our Emporia housing project, which was a leverage project. Thank you. It's an honor to be here today and share. Hopefully, I'm sharing the passion and the hard work and the brilliance, the wisdom from the community, the city, and all of our partners here. It's an honor to present this work, and we are entirely grateful for the investment that TCC has made and the impact that it's made in the Ontario residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. And also, I'd like to thank all 3 of our presenters for telling such compelling stories about the impacts of TCC within their communities, and giving us really just a taste of the impact that the program has had. Next slide. So we would like to now wrap up our portion of this presentation by sharing some of our own reflections and lessons learned from the last 2.5 years that UCLA has provided technical assistance and evaluation support to the TCC sites. And I'd like to invite Jason Karpman, our project lead for our TCC programs, to offer those reflections. Next slide. Jason, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, JR. So as JR mentioned, I'm Jason Karpman. I'm a staff researcher at the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. I lead 3 of our evaluation contracts with TCC sites. We work with all 3 of the round 1 grantees who you just heard from. We work with a round 2 grantee in Northeast San Fernando Valley, often referred to as Pacoima for shorthand. And then most recently, we took on Stockton, a round 3 grantee. So on the slide here, you'll see 4 evaluation progress reports that we just released this past May. And so on the far left, we've got Green Together in Northeast LA, Ontario Together in Ontario, Transform Fresno in Fresno, and Watts Rising in Watts. So what I'm going to highlight here is some of our findings that span all 4 sites. that we have sort of collected over the past 2.5 years of evaluation efforts. So across the 4 sites, our basic general observation is that we've seen a lot of the elements that are precursors to long-term transformation start to come into place. So first, we've seen that the holistic design of TCC, one that integrates multiple greenhouse gas reduction project types and transformative plans, we've seen that lead to productive synergies and multi-sector partnerships. So for example, there's been efficiencies at the community engagement events where project partners have been able to join forces and cross-promote each other's work. So at an open house event for an affordable housing opportunity, you may also hear from project partners who are leading the job training, excuse me, the job training activities for solar installation projects. So it's a way, this integrated design of TCC has really allowed the program to reach an even bigger population than would probably be possible if all of these investments were being implemented in silos. Second, we've seen that self-governance processes have strengthened and structured collaboration. So in other words, TCC has really motivated project partners to institutionalize regular meetings around TCC implementation, where local government agencies, community benefit organizations, and resident leaders get together, they share updates, they voice concerns, they pull resources, they problem solve together. And the TCC requirement to have these collaborative stakeholder structures has really formalized this process. Third, we've seen that community involvement with TCC implementation has advanced capacity building and leadership development in these communities. So in most of these sites, local community benefit organizations and resident leaders are really taking the lead on a lot of community engagement activities, and giving these individuals such important roles in the TCC implementation process and funding to do that work has really given them valuable experience and technical skills that have allowed them to tackle other challenges in the community, particularly around the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw that a lot of project partners were able to use their TCC projects and training that they've received to pivot and address a wider array of issues in the community. And then lastly, we've seen that the very presence of having a third-party evaluation as part of the TCC effort has really strengthened the overall transformative components of the program. So what I mean by that is our ability to even make these top 3 observations is by virtue of the fact that we're involved as an evaluator. And I know we're a little bit biased in saying that because that's the work we do as evaluation. So of course we think it's important, but during the Q&A, I welcome questions to each of the panelists about how they've seen the evaluation support their work, and any of the other findings that I've highlighted here. I welcome their reflections on those as well. And so if you want to learn more about these findings and see examples with quotes and images from the communities, I welcome you to take a look at the reports that are highlighted at the top of the page. You can find those at our website, innovation.luskin.ucla.edu. And with that, I am happy to turn it over to the Q&A portion of the session. Next slide.
Thanks, Jason. Yes, and so for the public, we have an esteemed set of state representatives who are with us from the member agencies of the Strategic Growth Council, and we're really excited for the Q&A to open up and for us to create space to hear from them if they have any questions. And so please go ahead and raise your hand and I'll make sure to call on you.
And before we start the discussion here, I'd just like to let the public know as well that there is currently no one signed up for a public comment on this item right now, item 7. But if you would like to, feel free to raise your hand. And after we finish up the discussion here, we will open up the public comment section. Thank you.
Great. Nguyen Tara, and if you could introduce yourself and also the organization that you're from.
Yes, I'm Nguyen Tara Key, Deputy Director for Climate Resilience in the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And first, just want to say thank you to all the panelists and presentations here today. It's really inspiring and wonderful to see all the work that is happening through PCC and within communities across the state. So thank you for all your work. My question for you all, really, I think, all of you touched on this in different ways. So really open this up to anybody who wants to respond. It's a two-part question. So just for context, a lot of the work that we're doing at OPR, and really kind of the lens I'm bringing to the work, is thinking about how we reduce risk within communities to future climate impacts, and also recognizing the need to build capacity within communities to be able to respond to a changing climate and what that means within communities. So I think each one of you, and within the evaluation report, is really highlighted just the critical importance of capacity building. And in the adaptation space, we talk about it as adaptive capacity. But I'm just curious, this is a big question for us at the state of how do we understand what is adaptive capacity, what is capacity, and then how do we measure and evaluate that? And I think for us also, kind of from a state vantage point, trying to think about how do we scale the level of investment that is needed to build capacity within communities to really respond to the challenges at hand. So I know those are big, broad questions, but would really love to hear from you all working on the ground. How do you think about capacity and adaptive capacity, and what are some really important things that we as the state should be thinking about in that space?
Yeah, I'd like to pitch that question to the grantee representatives we've just heard from first and give them an opportunity to respond to that.
Great question. Thank you. And this is Yvette. I'll dive in. This is something that capacity building and approaches, best practices, is something that is near and dear to my heart and work. And something that makes TCC very unique, and the process that I think would be beneficial to replicate, was the community participatory evaluation process that began the whole process with the project needs, the creation of the project needs and the community action plan. Other funders that we've worked with have done that, but not to the extent that we saw with this TCC grant. And having the Strategic Growth Council representatives come out, meeting with our resident leaders, the city, and all of the organizations that had partnered, and the time that it took, and also all of the planning processes that were part and parcel of that initial kind of investigation, are critical. So anything that's community participatory, such as that process, builds capacity. It educates residents, it educates organizations, and most importantly, we have a collective kind of learning that occurs that's led by the residents. So I'll pause there, but community participatory investments of all kinds, I think, where backbones like a city or Department of Public Health or the Strategic Growth Council or a trusted nonprofit acts as the backbone, really goes a long way in capacity building. Thank you.
If I can jump in and add on to that, I think when we started TCC, as some of the first folks out the gate, I think one of our biggest concerns was that the grant, although it spoke very holistically to community engagement, on the budget side was very reticent to fund it, and required a lot of the localities to come up with leverage resources to really invest in their engagement plan. I would say moving forward, hopefully the state has learned some lessons from TCC and seen the advantage to actually spending a lot of its dollars on these engagement pieces and not just on the infrastructure. So, I think we would encourage the state to really, as it, rethinks, these programs and hopefully improves them moving forward, that you put more money into the engagement side. that would allow us to pay, the street teams, the promotoras, that we're all using, that are really out there, becoming the leaders of their community, being the voices to educate folks on what resiliency means and how important it is. Without that, as we said, it's not as much of a meaningful process or a meaningful investment. The other thing I think that we found with TCC was a lot of our communities have very small CBOs that are functioning in those communities that weren't initially actually qualified to apply for the TCC funding or even to be a lead partner in the TCC funding because they didn't have the 3 years of audited financials. That was a requirement for any lead. And so it really eliminated the role that a lot of our CBOs could even play in being a part of this transformation in their community. And we had a very hard time kind of managing those expectations and explaining to the community why they couldn't participate in their own transformation. And so I think that, we found ways to sort of work around that by having lead organizations sub to those organizations to have them play roles. But I think moving forward, that's another thing that you might want to rethink is, if you have a strong, at least single backbone organization that's willing to help manage the grant, that you allow for more flexibility in your subcontractors and in the other entities that get to participate in receiving some of these funds. And it allows us to help them build capacity within their own community to take lead roles over time to hopefully transform. So those would be my main comments.
And I'd like to echo the comments of the other two awardees, but really want to highlight Jenny's comments around strong partnerships, because I think that's also specific to Fresno in terms of being able to be adaptive and building capacity, having the right partnerships, and navigating some of those challenges of smaller organizations that want to be engaged and strong community partners that the community supports, and really finding the right combination of partners in order to successfully move projects forward, but definitely not leaving out groups, organizations that do want to be engaged and can really help scale it up and advance the capacity building.
Terrific. And I mean, just to build on the social capacity resilience that's just been discussed, I just want to highlight, as we prepare for our heat season, the direct physical resilience and health resilience that is resulting from moving community members into higher quality housing, reducing urban heat island effects, and by providing greening and trees and areas. So there are direct climate resiliency investments that are allowing these communities and individuals to be less impacted and less harmed in the future by heat, wildfires, flooding, drought, things like that, because they're receiving these investments.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nuintara, for that question. And I'm going to pivot to Victoria Gonzalez.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Those are really great presentations. It's really wonderful to hear all of the great things you're doing in your communities. I'm Victoria Gonzalez Gerlach. I'm Senior Advisor at the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. My question, to build off of what Yvette was mentioning about the resident leaders adapting during the pandemic, was to see if you had any other lessons learned that we should consider that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic as we look to potential future rounds of funding. Just thinking, when you started this process, it was obviously way before that. And we know that sheltered, our communities have changed drastically throughout the last year. So We'd just like to get your input on things we should consider moving forward.
I think I'll just say that, I think Zoom and virtual participation is here to stay in some form moving forward, whether or not we're in a pandemic or not. And I think that, as a local government, I was, blown away by the amount of public participation going virtual. And so I think we want to continue in that route and make sure that, the organizations have ample resources in order to continue doing so and being able to provide as many ways as the public can engage.
I concur. And, for us, we're still unpacking the lessons learned. It's been such a whirlwind. I think we were shovel ready because we had the collective impact and partnership structure in place and because we had the resident leaders. So for me, leading the community engagement, I turned to the moms of our school district, quite frankly. In Ontario, the biggest retail outlet is the school district. If I could use retail outlet a little bit loosely. And I asked the moms that were attending virtual school, our resident leaders did as well, how they and their school pods or school networks were accessing technology. And since they use Zoom for school, we used Zoom. Then we tried to layer anything that we could. If there was messaging going out through the school districts, because we knew they had the widest kind of reach, we tried to layer and partner with them there. I also think, it got a little old school too. Picking up the phone and calling people was critical. I really appreciated how JR talked about resiliency. And I think we're going to be unpacking the impact, the mental health and psychological impact for some time, for everything that kind of merged and hit us in 2020. So I think it's also important to blend technological advances and innovations with traditional methods like picking up a phone and calling people. Phone trees worked really well initially when we were trying to get our grounding. Also, Kim Reddins is here from the City of Ontario. She's been amazing from the planning department and working with me and my team. We went door to door wearing PPE, and that was really, really, really critical. Some people had not seen a face in days, if not many days. So we're still unpacking it. One last thing I'd say, it was interesting. We held, I think, 5 virtual forums for the Vista Verde housing application process during the pandemic. And the city, National Core, who is our housing developer partner, and my team, we weren't sure how to exactly, approach that to make sure that we were reaching folks who really are left out of engagement for housing development, right? So I really appreciated that our developer, even though they're a national developer, they really relied on the wisdom from the resident leaders to guide that process. And there was a humility there that sometimes maybe we don't think of. Really trusting the wisdom. When we have collective impact, each sector, each stakeholder and partner has jurisdictional wisdom that I think it's so critical to just listen to that and then create an action plan to move forward. So thank you for letting me share that. I
don't have as much to add in terms of the methodologies that we use, because I think the other panelists covered that for outreach. But I do want to, I don't think we give government a pat on the back as much as we should. And I did want to use that question to give a huge amount of gratitude to the Strategic Growth Council and its staff during the pandemic for really stepping up and allowing us to shift and change some of our objectives and outcomes and projects midway just to react to what was going on in our community. So allowing us to use, some of our time and our grant to provide, instead of doing safe routes to schools, to have our groups that were doing safe routes to schools, having them doing safe routes to food pickup. So allowing us to make those shifts and allowing our programs to be reflective of the immediate needs of the community, and then giving us time extensions so that we could come back to the real work and really get the projects done in the way we wanted to over time was incredible. I've never seen such flexibility on the part of government. And so I really want to thank the state, and I want to thank the staff for playing that role, because it wouldn't have been the same if we hadn't had that level of commitment and partnership from your organizations.
Well, on behalf of all of SGC, we appreciate all these amazing comments. I do want to remind people that if you would like to make a comment, this is for the public at large, on this item, please raise your hand in Zoom. You can do this by clicking the raise hand button under the participant menu, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And on the Zoom platform, or by pressing number 9 if you're joining by phone. So this is just a reminder to members of the public that after conversations with state representatives, we'll be moving on to you. I saw Yana Garcia and Darwin Musavi, and so I don't know if one of you guys wants to jump in at this moment.
Hi, this is Yana Garcia from Cali, PA. Most of my questions were actually covered in Nuntara's question at the outset, but I guess the only thing that I would add, if there are any thoughts, and thank you again for such a wonderful presentation from folks from the grantees, is just whether you have any thoughts or ideas around metrics that we should be tracking broadly at the state level. We talk a lot, of course, about air pollution reduction, health improvements, data that we should be looking at to really see how these investments are making a difference on the ground and to be able to scale them up. And from your standpoint, I'm just curious if at the local level there are types of data that you think really highlight how helpful these investments are, what you would recommend in that respect.
I'm sure UCLA has ideas, as this is probably, their expertise. I would say on behalf of Watts Rising, I think that longitudinal looks are really going to reflect the true impact of the programs that you're running right now with TCC. I know we have indicator plans that we know we can track within the term of the grant, but I'm very, very interested. We've taken some baseline air quality studies in Watts through other funding that we had as leverage. And I'll be very interested to go out 5 years, 6 years and do new air quality studies to see if what differences we're seeing over time as we see things start to change, mode shifts in terms of use of transportation, our growth in our trees, to see kind of how that is really reducing the carbon impact. We also are very interested in following with our public health department, a lot of our health indicators within the population, as well as income indicators. So those are the things that I think we are hoping to track in a much more long-term framework. And I think those will be, sort of our true indicators of how effective this program is.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I would agree with Jenny. Any traffic patterns, air quality work that's being done as part of other projects as well, I think are really important to integrate. And yeah, would love to hear UCLA's perspective on, what ideas they have as well.
Jason, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I want to echo that everything that's been brought up so far about health and air quality indicators are important to track. I think the big challenge for us as the evaluator and helping the sites come up with an evaluation plan to track many of the things that we would like to track and they would like to track is the scale at which the data is available at low cost to us is often at a scale that's much bigger than these neighborhood scales at which the interventions are occurring. So if there's a policy recommendation that's born out of that observation, I think it is to strengthen evaluation efforts with providing more funding for surveying in the communities to do a real broad community scale survey where we are able to collect data about people's health and, to Jenny's point, in a longitudinal way. And the same thing with air quality monitoring, because the air quality data that we get is at the basin level often and doesn't really speak to small changes that's happening at the neighborhood scale. So I think there needs to be dedicated funding and technical capacity building around low cost air quality or air monitoring devices if that's of interest. And I think we got an earlier question that I also wanted to respond to about on the topic of data tracking with respect to adaptive capacity and how that can be measured. And I don't think there's going to be any single secondary data source that gives us what we want to know about adaptive capacity, some census indicator. I think that is really going to need to be born out of a collaborative evaluation planning process with the communities about how they define adaptive capacity, and through qualitative means where we do structured interviews and focus groups with project partners and community residents about how they've seen their capacities grow. So, and again, to get back to our slide with our observations about, and the last one being about the contribution of evaluation, I think that even being able to measure and talk about adaptive capacity can only be done through partnering with a third-party evaluator to sort of lead a structured interviewing process and data collection process so that you get data across a broad sample and you collect it in a consistent way. Anything else you want to add, JR?
Well, I would just, it's a terrific question and one we spent a lot of time thinking about at the beginning of this process. And we have an evaluation framework which lists dozens, if not hundreds, of indicators and outcomes that we are tracking over time. And I think, the challenges, what we care about is people's welfare, their health, how much they have to pay and for energy, for water, to cool their homes, their income, their opportunities for upward mobility and those of their families. And the Transformative Climate Communities produces some intermediate outcomes like tree planting and other observable things relatively quickly. And then some of these things we care the most about require more time to appear. And so there's a lag between when we make the investment and when we can start to see benefits. And so in that evaluation plan, we can sort of identify intermediate outcomes that we can track and measure, and then longer term things, some of which are what we really care about that take more time to express themselves. And I'll also say the other important thing is to have a control site that isn't benefiting from these investments. Because as we all know, the state goes through economic ups and downs. It goes through climatic ups and downs, which affect the whole state. And so sometimes we can confound, reductions in tree cover might happen because of a drought that's happening everywhere. And it might not allow us to tell the full story of urban greening in a transformative climate community, unless we have a comparison community that's also kind of experiencing that to compare to. So that methodological comparison provides a really powerful source of validity in the midst of communities that are experiencing lots of different kinds of economic and climatic impacts over time.
Thank you. That was all really helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. If there are any other questions from our state representatives, if you could just unmute yourself and jump in or raise your hand. And if not, we will go directly into public comment. And so,
quick question. Sorry,
Sure.
I'll be very quick.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I want to echo everyone's thanks for your presentations and ask a question that's very much on my mind as I work with a lot of partners that you see right now on developing a climate smart land strategy. Really interested in sort of any reflections that you might be willing to share around how implementing nature-based solutions in these projects went. Were there sort of lessons learned that you think we should all sort of be aware of? Any sort of particular benefits that these solutions provide that really resonated with community members versus those that maybe didn't, but through sort of outreach or connectivity grew in importance. So whether it was extreme heat or increasing access to locally grown food, et cetera, I would just love to hear sort of any reflections you think we should be aware of.
Grantees, would you like to go first?
I would take just 2 seconds to say, just initial observations are, I think we are very used to funding capital investments, right? I think government's very used to funding capital investments, but we forget about operating. And the fact that these capital investments need long-term operating subsidy to really become sustainable. We ran into a circumstance, in Watts, and so I'll use this as an example where, we had a project partner who was putting together a garden on a school site. It was highly functioning, in great condition. That partner, something happened to their organization. They had to leave the site, and within 6 months, that entire garden turned back to, kind of where, back to, being completely unruly and unproductive, right? So now we have to reinvest. We're bringing on new partners. We're bringing on to kind of get it back going again. But it reminds you how fragile some of these improvements are without proper stewardship or operating funds. And so, as I think about, your talk about sort of land improvements and what we're doing, I think it's really important to think about who's taking care of those improvements over the long haul and how sustainable are those efforts in those organizations. And we talked about the capacity building of our local organizations. So I guess it sort of just re-stresses that point for me. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I just want to concur. Jenny's point is critical. The social and kind of relational kind of elements of this grant are critical. And one of the observations I had over the last couple of years with our project is with all the different capital projects, there were different jurisdictions really leading the charge with those capital projects. And as a result, they were kind of moving, not always in tandem. And for us, I'm biased because I'm the network weaver, but I think that's one of the things that makes us really unique. And in 2015, we had a funder who actually, it was their recommendation that our collective impact group and project invest in a network weaver. It was a proven model that seemed to have traction nationally for working through complexity and working through capital development and capital, grants that focused on capital development. So I don't know when budgets are being done, right? And there's $35 to $34.25 million on the table with these high level capital developments and budgets. A lot of times the social elements and the OD, organizational development elements, might kind of leave the table because the funds are usurped understandably for these larger projects. I think that if there's any way to really make sure that that doesn't happen, if possible, it would be a benefit to anyone moving forward. We need these social, relational, kind of organizational elements within these projects.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the sustainability piece is definitely important from the perspective of the community in terms of, really wanting to, making these priorities for the community and wanting to see those through regardless of the challenges that we might navigate, internally among the organizations, the leads, et cetera. So the sustainability piece is not only important to move forward with objectives, but also to can really lend trust to the community and continue their engagement because those are the priorities that they developed.
And I'll just to build on, I think it was Jenny's point, nature-based solutions, whether it's tree planting, urban gardening, organic digesters for recycling that material, or reducing fossil fuel pollution and replacing it with cleaner, renewable energy that supports transportation. It all requires ongoing maintenance to make it effective and successful. The trees have to be trimmed and watered. The open space and gardens need to be maintained and supported. And I think it brings into focus the importance of having a local government partner who has a public financing capacity to play a role in that community and supporting those capital investments. And that kind of governmental health, financial health, is something that we don't want it to be another source of structural inequality that re-expresses itself and walks back some of the benefits of these initial investments. And so I think, and we don't always know what the solution to anemic public finance investments are, but I think we need to continue to think about that and learn about that to make the TCC program continue to be successful over time.
Great, and then I just want to provide an opportunity. I know, Darwin, you had unmuted at some point, and Dr. Starr, you had a variety of chats. Some of them probably got resolved, but yes, it appears Fabi has mentioned that there are no current public comments that we're waiting for.
Jesse, thanks for the opportunity to chime in here. This is Darwin Musawi from the State Transportation Agency. This has been a great discussion, and my questions have been answered given all the great questions that were asked. So I don't have anything additional, but just want to say thank you for all the work all of you do. I always find these types of discussions to be kind of motivating and inspiring as we go back and think about all the other stuff that we're doing that doesn't necessarily accomplish everything that TCC has been able to in terms of growing capacity on the ground and integrating various investments. So it's helpful to be able to take little tidbits back to the various other programs that maybe aren't set up quite this way and don't have the same opportunities, but we can certainly take little pieces and try to integrate them into other work that we do. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Mark Starr, California Health and Human Services Agency. And my questions were also answered, and I kind of indicated that in the chat. I think that most of them were covered, but excellent presentations. Really appreciate the perspectives, and obviously hugely important to us in Health and Human Services and Department of Public Health, in particular our Office of Health Equity. When we look at programs in communities such as our Reducing Disparities Project, where we try and engage small community organizations, and some of the challenges reflected here today we've experienced on our end as well, as far as getting them involved and engage in the community, and some of the rewards of doing that. So it's really refreshing to see the kind of the same success and progress in communities for various purposes to improve the community's health overall. So really compliment everybody on the excellent work. And I'll just add to, I appreciate the responses about the the longitudinal need for evaluation and the lag time to see some of these results. My roots are actually as an epidemiologist, so I like hearing some of that and the control communities. So very nicely done, everything to date. So really appreciate it.
Great. Well, I have been notified that we do not have public comment for this item, but I do want to say thank you so very much to JR, to Jason, to Jenny, to Dolores, and to Yvette for all of the work you guys are doing independently and collectively to make transformative impacts on the ground, and then to share those stories so that the state can do better every single time. And so thank you so much for that. We are going to put up the slide again so that the public is aware that we have adjourned the formal SGC Council meeting. Many of the action items that were currently in that agenda have been postponed to our August 29th meeting. Please join us again then. We are now in a important and amazing public information portion of today's event that has highlighted the Transformative Climate Communities Program and the evaluation work conducted by UCLA. And our second session will be focused on a staff report. We have SGC, TCC program staff Saharnaz Mirzazad and Alexandra Gallo, who are going to present to us about the disadvantaged unincorporated communities framework, which was inspired by Senate Bill 351, Hurtado 2019, which directed SGC to develop strategies to expand its pool of applicants to include disadvantaged unincorporated communities. So we are excited. We will hear from also members of the public and are excited about a round of questions and answers from our state representatives. So I'll go ahead and turn to Saharnaz and Alex to facilitate this next session. Thank you everyone else.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Saharnaz Mirzazad. I'm Deputy Director of Community Investment and Planning at SGC. I'm here with my colleague Alex Gallo to present a framework that we developed over the last year on how to expand TCC program to disadvantaged unincorporated communities. I would like to emphasize that what we are offering today is a framework to guide us in a direction over the next couple of years, and we hope to adjust this framework based on lessons learned in future. We are here to ask you all and the public with initial feedback on this framework that will be incorporated into the next guidelines update. This will be eventually go through the public comments process during the guidelines update if TCC receives additional funding. Before starting the presentation, I would like to thank my colleague Alex Gallo from TCC team and Helen Campbell from OPR for all their efforts to develop this framework and developing the doc data spatial analysis tool. This has been a huge lift for a small team without any additional resources. So with that, I would like to start my presentation. And Fabia, can you go to the next slide, please? So in this presentation, I will cover overview of AB 2722 and SB 351 methodology and key findings, and my colleague Alex Gallo will present our recommendation. Next slide, please. TCC program was created through AB 2722 to fund the development and implementation of neighborhood level transformative climate community plans that include multiple coordinated greenhouse gas emission reduction projects that provide local economic, environmental, and health benefits to disadvantaged communities as described in section 39711 of the Health and Safety Code. During round 1 and round 2, unincorporated communities were not eligible to apply for TCC implementation funds, but were eligible for planning grants. In response to SB 351 passed in 2019, which required TCC program to include unincorporated communities in future rounds, TCC program expanded the eligibility to include DOC communities that received TCC planning grant in previous rounds. Next slide, please. In order to develop this framework, we took three-pronged approach. The first, we looked to develop a baseline of understand where we are right now. We conducted an extensive literature review and consulted with 29 experts with experience working in disadvantaged unincorporated communities, ranging from academics to community organization and state, local, and federal government staff. Then, based on this consultation, we developed a 19% TCC DOC working group to help answer critical questions and provide feedback on all recommendations. One result from the working group was the need for a supplemental tool to the Cali water screen that include block group level data to help identify DOCs traditionally overshadowed by larger census tracts. We worked with Helen Campbell from OPR to develop a data spatial analysis tool informed by the working group to address this feedback from the work group. We will discuss this item further in the guidelines recommendation. Next slide, please. As you can see, we had a robust working group which consisted of many state and local agencies, academic colleagues, and advocacy organizations such as California Environmental Justice Alliance, California Road Legal Assistance, Center for Race and Poverty and Environment, Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, Policy Link, Pueblo Hondo Community Development Corporation, and Self-Help Enterprise, which supported us during this entire process. With that, I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Alex, to give an overview of California DOCs. And I will take the questions after she finished her presentation. Alex?
Great, thank you, Saharnaz. Fabiha, could you move to the next slide, please? So as mentioned, my name is Alex Gallo, and I am so excited to provide you all with an update on our investment framework for disadvantaged unincorporated communities, also known as DUCs. To provide you with a high-level overview of California DUCs, state law defines DUCs as an area of inhabited territory located within an unincorporated area of a county in which the annual median household income is less than 80% of the statewide MHI. There are three types of DUCs which are located in the image to the right. Island DUCs, which are located within a city, fringe DUCs, which are located within a city's sphere of influence, and legacy DUCs, which are located outside of a city's sphere of influence. The development of DUCs are due to neglect and systematic inequalities in California growth planning that is rooted in structural racism. Generations of immigrants and low-income people settled in California in the 1900s, and they remained excluded from urban areas through redlining and racially exclusive housing policies, often cited as non-viable. This has led to a cycle of disinvestment in which there are real challenges for people who live in DUCs. For example, many DUCs lack adequate drinking water. And according to Policy Link's in-depth analysis, people of color are disproportionately represented in DUCs in comparison to cities, counties, and census-designated places. Next slide, please. So through our research and consultation phase, we found that there are 4 key challenges to infrastructure investments in DUCs. First, DUCs lack key infrastructure and financial capital to maintain and operate existing and future investments. Second, DUC legislation implementation lacks uniformity, making it difficult to build on those improvements. Third, DUC spatial data is inconsistent, outdated, and often unreliable. And finally, there are political, relational, and capacity challenges that make annexation and consolidation efforts challenging. Local governments often cite infrastructure and ratepayer costs as a key reason for refusing incorporation or service extensions. On the other hand, some DUCs also do not want to be annexed due to distrust or impacts on way of life, including agricultural sovereignty. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to walk you through our proposed TCC DUC recommendations for Round 4 guidelines. All recommendations are not additive to what is required for incorporated communities. As such, all applicants, incorporated or unincorporated, will need to demonstrate deep, meaningful engagement that show all projects were selected by the community. Next slide, please. First, I'm going to walk you through our proposed mapping eligibility requirements, in which there are 4 options that an applicant may choose from. Next slide, please. Option number 1 is eligibility through verification, in which DUC applicants must demonstrate verified DUC status through their local agency formation commission, LAFCO, or another public agency, and are located within the top 25% disadvantaged communities per Cal Enviro screen. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we worked with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research to develop a data spatial tool with block group level data that we could ground truth with the working group to ensure more DUC eligibility. As a result, for option 2, TCC DUC applicants may utilize the following metrics to determine eligibility. The first metric is to be within the top 25% disadvantaged communities. This would be overlaid by the California Hard to Count Index that includes block group level data utilized to reach the hardest to count communities for the US Census. This index is based on 14 demographic, housing, and socioeconomic variables, including broadband access. And finally, the applicant would utilize the 250 parcels per square mile layer. This represents unincorporated areas of the state that have that parcel density. And this is in order to help identify DUCs that contain the semblance of a neighborhood. Next slide, please. Options 3 and 4 are additional eligibility pathways. And this is for DUCs that do not have verified DUC status and also do not show up on the DUC data spatial tool. They may submit additional measures, including localized data, to identify population characteristics and density defined by neighborhood level assessment. Additionally, all TCC planning grantees, previous planning grantees, will be automatically eligible for implementation grants. This is due to differences in Cal Enviro Spring 3.0 and the Draft 4.0, and we want to ensure that they can still access the funds. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to walk you through our other proposed eligibility requirements. Next slide, please. So first, we are recommending some adjustments to our planning and technical assistance portfolio. We recommend instituting an optional pre-proposal application phase where staff can provide an assessment early on. A pre-proposal phase can be particularly beneficial for DUCs that are usually under-resourced. Additionally, because DUCs lack the planning work necessary to pursue many grants across the state, we recommend increasing the planning grant amount for DUCs to account for both planning and pre-development costs and to prepare them for implementation. Next slide, please. Our current implementation grants require project readiness, including permits, project maps and designs, and operations and maintenance plans. Due to the severity of disinvestment in these communities, we recommend making the following adjustments to our longstanding infrastructure and readiness criteria. For infrastructure criteria, the applicant must demonstrate access to community water and sewer that is in compliance with State Water Board standards. Alternatively, they may provide a developed plan for obtaining access at application. Additionally, the applicant must demonstrate operations and maintenance plans for basic infrastructure. However, we know this will be especially challenging to many DUCs that do not have basic infrastructure. Staff will work with potential applicants during the pre-proposal phase to help make connections to resources. Next slide, please. And finally, we have our program alignment criteria. DUC applicants need to demonstrate alignment with program objectives, including greenhouse gas reductions. All applicants will need to include in their application an affordable public transit and car sharing program that would connect the community to major job centers and regional service hubs. This is something that we could fund if requested. Additionally, to prevent potentially increasing sprawl development and vehicles miles traveled, DUCs that are within a city sphere of influence will need to demonstrate that the investment will not result in further sprawl. Next slide, please. And with that, those are all of our recommendations that we are considering at this time. We'd like to especially thank our working group for their critical participation in developing this framework. In terms of next steps, we hope to gain feedback from agency representatives today. And if awarded funding, TCC will also intake feedback through the formal guidelines public comments process. So thank you, and we look forward to your feedback.
Thank you, everyone. I am happy to take any questions that you might have about the dock expansion.
This is New and Tara. I raised my hand, but I'm not sure if it worked. Can I go, or are you?
Oh, yes, go ahead, New and Tara.
Okay, great. I don't really have a question, just a quick comment here. I just want to thank our colleagues at SGC, and also just a special shout out also to Helen at OPR for all her work and partnership on this, especially looking at the development of the tool. So really appreciate that. And I just want to also highlight the importance of this work. I think not only for TCC, but also just across, as we across the administration are trying to figure out how to actually implement our ambitious climate agenda, both on mitigation and adaptation and resilience, and really understanding what it takes to be able to implement in all communities and in all regions of the state. So I think this work that you've done here really helps us better understand kind of the complexities and challenges, but also where there are opportunities, and looking forward to continued conversation through the TCC process in the coming years around how to be able to drive on this. So thank you all.
Thank you, Nintara.
Dr. Starr?
Yeah, thank you. Totally, first of all, thank you. I think this is well thought out, and I appreciate the, identifying the really important differences in unincorporated communities and some of the challenges, and it looks like these are sensible recommendations to try and address that. My comment is really a totally minor one, but as I was listening to it, I was simply wondering if it's possible to change a trend here of pronouncing DUC as Duke instead of Duck, but that's just a thought.
Thank you. Probably we should just avoid saying Duck, which is a disadvantaged unincorporated community, so everybody can understand. Thank you for the comment.
Are there any questions from our state representatives?
Hi, this is Victoria. I just wanted to see if you could expand a little bit more on some of the technical assistance strategies you're planning on implementing. I know as we, we want to make sure that we're deploying culturally relevant strategies, and also being mindful of the different capacity in some of these areas. So if you could just tell a little bit more about that.
Definitely. Thank you for your question, Victoria. TCC program provides technical assistance during application, and it has been a part of the program since the beginning. But what was in the presentation actually make it more tailored to needs of the communities in unincorporated part of the state. What we have in mind, and definitely we'll get feedback from stakeholders on that front, is if we can fund some of the nonprofits that are working on the ground in these communities to be able to bring different partners together and implement, especially implementation partners, to be part of the conversation with the community to help them with solution and brainstorm with them, is what is in our mind. So early stages of the development and what needs to be done is something that we think it would be necessary to bring to these communities. And as was presented in the presentation, these communities are starting from really like a place that some of the basic needs don't exist, and we need to make sure that we are meeting them where they are, and like providing technical assistance to respond to that reality on the ground, and help them to build the capacity to be able to get to a place that they can actually apply, be competitive, and implement the projects. And that would be our goal in future. And I totally agree with you with the culturally appropriate technical assistant. We think that the best way to do it is through the nonprofits that are already working with those communities and support them to do the work, versus like hiring a consultant that would not be able to be with the community or support them in a way that would fit their situation. So that's what is in our vision, and we'll try to achieve that goal. And we'll work with our contracting department to see what are our options.
Are there any other questions? And if not, we can transition to public comment. Fabija, is there anyone waiting for public comment?
Yeah, we have one public commenter signed up for this item, and we can go ahead and begin the public comment. So I will read the names of everyone who has signed up to comment on this item, 8 on the agenda. And we have one person signed up to comment on this item. So when you hear your name, please raise your hand in Zoom. And again, you can do this by clicking raise hand under the participants menu, which you can find at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom platform, or by pressing *9 if you are joining by phone. You will have 2 minutes to make your comment, and if you are joining via the Zoom platform online, you'll be able to see the timer on your screen. Otherwise, I will notify you when your time is up. So I think we have our commenters' hands raised. Their name is Maria Pozar. And if anyone else wishes to make a comment on this item, please raise your hand now, and we will start and we will call on you after this first public commenter. So Maria, the floor is yours.
Muy buenas tardes. Disculpen, no hablo inglés, tampoco entiendo inglés, entonces mi comentario va a ser en español, espero me puedan comprender. Mi comentario esta tarde es para que podamos o puedan diseñar sus estrategias que sean más accesibles a nuestras comunidades no incorporadas. Yo vivo en una comunidad que no es incorporada, al este del Valle de Coachella, del condado de Riverside, que está cerca de la laguna del Salton Sea. Es muy importante para mí que se haga enverdecimiento en nuestras comunidades, porque como todos sabemos, la laguna se está secando y se está elevando mucho polvo tóxico. Si tenemos enverdecimiento, eso va a poder disminuir el polvo en nuestras casas. Lamentablemente también no tenemos una infraestructura accesible en donde el distrito escolar o el autobús público pueda poner una sombra en nuestras paradas de autobuses. Eso es pésimo porque estamos en unas temperaturas de 3 dígitos en el este del valle. Tampoco tenemos viviendas accesibles en el este del valle. En una casa viven 3 familias y eso es muy lamentable. No tenemos agua potable accesible en nuestras comunidades. Es así que por favor les ruego y les suplico que por favor verifiquen o planeen más los diseños para que estos proyectos sean más accesibles a nosotros, las comunidades que no somos incorporadas, porque lamentablemente tenemos que esperar que el condado haga algo y eso tarda año y año. Pero en cambio, nosotros con una organización que se llama Consejo de Liderazgo, ya tenemos un plan de acción en donde podemos hacer ese plan de acción inmediatamente y poder ayudar a nuestras familias no incorporadas. Muchísimas gracias a todos los que nos acompañaron esta tarde. Les agradezco que se hayan tomado el tiempo de escuchar mi comentario público. Buen día. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Maria, and Jessica Buendia will now provide a translation.
Muchísimas gracias, María. Nada más quería confirmar cuál es la ciudad que dijo de dónde viene su comunidad y también cómo se llama su organización.
No trabajo con ninguna organización. Soy un miembro de la comunidad del este del Valle de Coachella que se ubica en el condado de Riverside. Yo creo que todos conocen el Salton Sea, entonces yo vivo al lado del Salton Sea. La organización con la que yo me reuní hace 2 años para poder diseñar un plan de acción es Consejo de Liderazgo. Lo puedo pronunciar en español, pero si ustedes lo traducen en inglés, pues probablemente puedan encontrarlo. No sé cómo se dice en inglés. Muchísimas gracias, señora Jessica.
Sí, no, está muy bien. Entonces, voy a hacer la traducción para todos los demás aquí, sabiendo que también tenemos representantes del Estado que también son bilingües y que sí escucharon a lo que usted dijo y ahora no necesitan la traducción, pero para los que sí necesitan la traducción, I am going to share with you that Maria Posar, she is from East Coachella Valley near Riverside County, and she has been a community member involved with the Leadership Council on developing the TCC planning sites. And her public comment is really focused on encouraging us as the state to develop strategies that include unincorporated communities. In Coachella, she herself really has a desire for her community to become greener and said that she does not have infrastructure in place, even to provide shade, near bus stops as heat rises in her community. She's hoping to see more affordable housing and also to address issues of accessible water in that community, and really encourages us that as we continue to plan and design projects, that we make sure that accessibility is at the forefront of what we do, especially for unincorporated areas who may not be able to rely on their local counties to do this. And so thank you very much. And to the extent that our state representatives want to be responsive, since this is not a Bagley Keene meeting, this is a public webinar, I'm happy to do a translation back to Maria.
Well, perhaps I would just pipe in and say thank you for your remarks, and to the extent that we can think about how to incorporate them in some of our work, all of the entities here are thinking about the update to our state's adaptation strategy, and so addressing extreme heat is a very important part of that effort. And so I appreciate that it's a concern, understanding that it's a concern, and would also just underscore our commitment to using nature-based solutions to support addressing extreme heat and also water quality and water supply. So just want to say thank you very much for your comments.
Señora María, la señorita Amanda Hansen, que viene del Departamento de Recursos Naturales, dice que muchísimas gracias por su comentario y que ellos en su agencia, pero también en combinación con representantes aquí, están pensando en cambios en el clima y cómo nos vamos a adaptar a esos cambios. Y los asuntos que usted dijo, especialmente del calor, son prioridades para nosotros y ella específicamente está viendo cuáles son las soluciones que son basadas en naturaleza, donde podemos ayudar a los asuntos del clima, y también ella tiene un gran enfoque en el asunto de agua, acceso al agua. Entonces, nada más le quería decir a usted esos comentarios de la señorita Amanda Hansen. Is there anybody else that wants to provide
gracias,
comments?
señora.
Oh, sí.
Disculpe. Sí, muchísimas gracias, señorita Jessica, o señora, disculpe, no los conozco bien. Señora Amanda, muchísimas gracias. Y por favor, aquí está la comunidad del este del Valle, para cualquier cosa que se les ofrezca, para una orientación o un consejo, cómo los podemos guiar, porque creo que los mejores expertos somos nosotros, las comunidades, que los podemos guiar para que ustedes puedan resaltar su trabajo, porque es un gran trabajo que se hace, pero cuando se hace conjunto hacia la comunidad, se puede hacer mucho mejor. Muchísimas gracias a todos, y voy a apagar mi micrófono, ya no voy a hablar más para no...
Great. Muchísimas gracias, Maria. She says to everyone on this call that thank you so much for your comments. She says the best experts are found in the community, and to the extent that they can be a resource in partnering with the state to help meet the state's objectives, to improving our communities, that they are here to support us. And so again, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you so much for the Leadership Council and their coordination and resident involvement efforts. Fabiha, are there any other public comments?
Seeing no other public comments, Jessie, I will pass it back to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you guys. We're actually now nearing the end of our public workshop. Thank you everyone for your flexibility. Thank you everyone who is tuning into the call today. I feel like I was sharing with staff, I'm like, this feels like a think tank. We have an opportunity to bring our academic experts together with our municipal and local government experts, and then of course ending with the amazing recommendations of our residents on the ground, like Maria, I think have been very, very powerful. And so I just want to thank all of you. And we look forward to seeing everybody at the August 29th meeting. And we hope that you all come back and tune in. And the more that we can get people to engage from the public, I think the better we are as a state for making sure that we're doing our work in a manner that is accountable, transparent, and constantly improves on itself. And so thank you so much to everyone, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.